What would you do if a homeless child with torn sneakers promised to heal your daughter and meant every word? It was raining that Tuesday in downtown Chicago, not the gentle kind but the type that soaked through expensive coats and made even billionaires hurry. People rushed past Northwestern Memorial Hospital on Superior Street, umbrellas clashing, briefcases clutched tight, everyone moving like they could escape whatever brought them there. But one person sat completely still on a piece of flattened cardboard near the main entrance, sketching quietly in a rain-soaked notebook. His name was Marcus Williams, just 10 years old. His jacket was 3 sizes too big, sleeves covering his hands, and his sneakers had holes patched with electrical tape. A faded baseball cap sat crooked on his head, barely keeping the rain from his eyes. He didn't ask for change, didn't hold up signs, just sat there watching people come and go. He'd been there most weekdays for months. Some security guards had tried to move him along when he first started showing up, but eventually they gave up. Marcus didn't cause problems. He nodded when spoken to, and when he wasn't drawing in his notebook, he was observing, always observing. Most folks assumed he had family inside, maybe a sick parent, maybe he was waiting for someone. Nobody asked too many questions, not in a place like that. Across the street, engine running in a no-parking zone, sat a midnight black Bentley. The rain drummed against its roof, but the driver didn't move. Inside was Richard Blackstone, 52 years old, with steel-gray hair and a jawline that made boardrooms go quiet. His tie hung loose, his collar unbuttoned. He had money, you could see it in everything from his handmade watch to the way his car gleamed even in the gray weather. But he looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. In the back seat, secured in a specialized car seat, sat his daughter Emma, 7 years old, blonde curls damp from the humidity, legs motionless beneath a designer blanket. Her eyes were bright and alert, but she hadn't spoken much since the accident. A diving board incident at their Malibu estate had changed everything. One moment she was racing through their garden, the next she was paralyzed from the chest down, trapped in silence. Richard opened the back door, lifted her carefully, and carried her toward the entrance. He didn't notice Marcus at first, most people didn't. But Marcus noticed him. He saw the way Richard held her like she was made of glass, the way her eyes stayed fixed on the rain-soaked sidewalk, avoiding the building. Marcus stared longer than usual, then just before they passed, he stood up and called out clearly, "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Richard stopped mid-step. Not because he was angry or confused, but because of how the words were delivered, not like a sales pitch, not like a cruel joke, just calm, clear, and certain, like Marcus believed it with every fiber of his being. Richard turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" Marcus didn't back down. He stepped forward, tucking his notebook under his arm. "I said I can help her walk again." Richard's grip tightened around Emma. "That's not funny, kid." "I'm not joking," Marcus replied, his voice steady. There was no smile, just that same quiet confidence, an adult kind of certainty in a child's body. Richard looked down at Marcus's clothes, his taped-up shoes, the cracked phone screen sticking out of his too big pocket. This had to be some kind of scam, maybe even a cruel coincidence. He turned and walked inside without another word. But inside, he couldn't stop thinking about it, the way the kid said it, not with desperation, not with false hope, but like it was simply true. Something about that voice stuck in Richard's mind, and it was going to keep pulling at him until he came back. Richard tried to forget about the boy for the next several hours. He sat through Emma's appointments, nodding through updates from neurologists, physical therapists, and specialists. All of them used the same careful phrases they always did, managing expectations, long recovery ahead, miracles take time. He'd heard it all before. But Marcus's words kept echoing in his head like a persistent drumbeat, "I can make your daughter walk again." By mid-afternoon, Richard and Emma stepped out of the building. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy and cold. He walked toward the car, cradling Emma as always, when he noticed Marcus again, still there, same cardboard, same notebook, except this time he was looking directly at Richard, like he knew he'd return. Richard hesitated. He glanced at Emma, her head rested against his shoulder, eyes closed. Her body felt too light for a 7-year-old. He turned toward Marcus. "You again," he muttered, walking closer. "Why would you say something like that? You think this is some kind of game?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, sir." "You don't even know her," Richard snapped, lowering Emma gently into her wheelchair. "You don't know what she's been through. You don't know what we've been through." Marcus didn't flinch. "I don't have to know her to help," he said quietly. Richard straightened up. "You're what, 10? Maybe 11? 10 exactly," Marcus replied. "You're a little boy sitting outside a hospital with holes in your shoes. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter?" Marcus looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. My grandmother used to help people walk again, he said softly. She was a physical therapist for 40 years. She taught me everything she knew. She said the body has memory, even when the mind forgets how to use it. Richard stared at him, skepticism hardening in his chest. So what, you watched her do some exercises and now you think you're a doctor? I watched her help a veteran walk after 3 years in a chair, Marcus said, eyes lifting to meet Richard's. She didn't have fancy machines or surgical tools, just her hands, her patience, and faith that healing takes time. Richard opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. He glanced around. A nurse walking by gave Marcus a small wave. A janitor nodded in the boy's direction. They all seemed to know him. I'm not giving you money, Richard said firmly. I didn't ask for money. Then what do you want? Marcus took a deep breath and stepped closer. Just 1 hour. Let me show you what I know. Richard looked back at Emma, who had opened her eyes and was watching both of them quietly. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I should walk away right now. Marcus didn't move. I should call security, Richard added. Still the boy stayed silent. Richard finally exhaled sharply. Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet us at Millennium Park tomorrow, 2 p.m. Don't be late. Marcus nodded once. I'll be there. Richard climbed into the Bentley, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. But in the rearview mirror, Marcus was still standing there, hands at his sides, expression unreadable. That night, after dinner, Richard sat in his home office overlooking Lake Michigan. Financial reports were scattered across his mahogany desk, but none of them held his attention. He kept thinking about the way Marcus stood there, like he possessed some secret knowledge. Emma appeared in the doorway in her wheelchair. Daddy, she asked softly. He turned. Yes, sweetheart? Who was that boy? Richard paused. Just someone we met outside the hospital. He looked like he really believed it, she said quietly. Believed what? That I could walk again. Richard stared at her, his chest tightening. She smiled just slightly and moved her fingers across the armrest of her chair like they were tiny legs walking. But Richard wasn't smiling, because for the first time in months, something inside him didn't feel numb. It felt dangerous, like hope. Millennium Park was the kind of place where tourists took selfies and business people ate lunch on benches. On Thursday afternoons, it was usually busy, but that day Marcus had found a quiet spot near the Crown Fountain, away from the crowds. He wore the same oversized jacket, but his notebook was tucked away. Instead, he had a small duffel bag at his feet and a clean towel folded beside him. At exactly 2:07 p.m., Richard's Bentley pulled up to the nearest parking area. He didn't say anything at first, just got Emma out, settled her in her wheelchair, and rolled her over to where Marcus sat. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, like he was already regretting this decision. Marcus stood up when they arrived. Hi again, he said politely. Richard gave a curt nod. Emma waved shyly. Marcus smiled at her. Hi Emma. Her eyes widened a little. Hi. Richard raised an eyebrow. How do you know her name? You said it yesterday when you were talking to her, Marcus replied. I remember things. Richard didn't respond, just gestured at the towel. So what now? Magic tricks? Marcus ignored the sarcasm. No sir, just basics. He opened his bag and pulled out a pair of thick socks, a tennis ball, a small container of what looked like coconut oil, and a cloth pouch filled with warm rice. Richard squinted. What is all that? Things my grandmother used, Marcus answered. The rice provides gentle heat to relax tight muscles. The ball helps with pressure points. Richard folded his arms again. Marcus turned to Emma. Is it okay if I work with your legs for a little while? Nothing will hurt, I promise. And if anything feels strange, just tell me to stop, okay? Emma looked up at her father. He sighed deeply. You can try. Just be very careful. Marcus knelt beside her chair. He gently removed the blanket from her legs and placed the warm rice pouch over her thighs. Emma tensed slightly. Too warm, he asked. She shook her head. It feels nice. Marcus nodded and waited. After a few minutes, he began to gently move her legs, not forcing, not pulling, just small, careful rotations. Side to side, up and down. Richard watched intently, ready to intervene if something went wrong. But nothing did. You ever done this before? Richard asked suspiciously. Marcus didn't look up. My grandmother used to take me to community centers after school. She helped seniors, people who couldn't afford regular therapy. She said everyone deserves to feel whole again. I used to carry her equipment. Richard raised an eyebrow. And she taught you all this? Yeah. She said the body doesn't always need expensive treatments, just attention and patience. He tapped lightly on Emma's knee with his knuckle. Can you feel that? No, she whispered. Marcus nodded calmly. That's okay. I'll keep checking. He continued talking to her while working, asking about her favorite movies, her favorite foods, what games she liked to play. At first her answers were brief, but then she started asking him questions. Do you live around here? Kind of. Do you go to school? I used to. Why not anymore? Marcus hesitated. My grandmother got sick, then she passed away. I've been figuring things out since then. Emma looked down. I'm sorry. Marcus gave her a gentle smile. Thank you. Richard's posture softened slightly, but he remained silent. After about 30 minutes, Marcus gently tapped her ankle again. How about now? Emma blinked. Maybe, like a tiny pressure? Marcus looked up at Richard. That's progress. Richard squinted. She sometimes says that during her regular sessions too. Yeah, Marcus replied, but those sessions happen inside sterile rooms with beeping machines. Sometimes kids get nervous around all that equipment. They tense up. But here, he gestured to the open park, there's fresh air, trees, space to breathe. It feels different. Richard didn't argue, but he was definitely listening now. Marcus helped Emma stretch both legs, then showed her some simple toe exercises to try. She attempted them, nothing dramatic happened, but she didn't look discouraged. I'll show you more next week, Marcus said, standing up. Healing takes time, but your muscles, he pointed to her thighs, they haven't forgotten how to work. We just need to remind them slowly. Emma smiled more genuinely this time. Okay. Richard cleared his throat. We're not making any promises, he said quickly. Marcus nodded. I'm not asking for any. I'm just trying. Richard stared at him for a long moment, then without warning, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded $100 bill. Marcus stepped back immediately. No sir, I don't want your money. Richard looked surprised. Then why are you doing this? Marcus shrugged. Because your daughter smiled. Richard looked down at Emma. She was still smiling, but he couldn't understand how a boy who had lost everything could give so much to a girl he barely knew. The following Thursday was cooler, but Marcus still wore his jacket, not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of his grandmother. She used to call it his helper's coat, said every good healer needed something that reminded them why they cared. He was already at Millennium Park by 1:45, towel spread out, supplies organized, and a bottle of water sitting beside him. A few joggers passed by, and someone's dog barked in the distance. At exactly 2 p.m., Richard's Bentley arrived. Emma was grinning before the car even stopped. Marcus waved at her. Hi Emma. Hi, she called back, her curls bouncing as Richard helped her into the wheelchair. Richard looked less tense this time, but still guarded. He gave Marcus a small nod, no words, but it was more than last week. Marcus got to work, same setup, same warm rice pack, but this time something had shifted. Emma was actively participating now. Can you press your heel down toward the ground? Marcus asked gently. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Nothing happened. It's okay, he said. Sometimes it takes your brain a while to find the right pathway. It's like trying to remember a phone number you haven't used in a long time. Richard stood behind them, arms at his sides this time, more to stay warm than to protect himself. Why do you keep doing this? He asked suddenly. Marcus glanced up. Because I remember what it felt like when my grandmother helped people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too. Richard nodded slowly. You ever think about doing something else with your life? Sometimes, Marcus said, but this feels right. Richard looked at Emma. She was wiggling her toes, barely, but they moved. For the first time, he didn't say anything. He just watched. The next few weeks they kept coming, same time, same place. Marcus taught Emma how to use resistance bands to strengthen her ankles. He rolled tennis balls under her feet to help her brain reconnect with them. He showed Richard how to massage specific pressure points behind her knees and explained how every nerve had a purpose, even when it went quiet. And then came the difficult day. It was the 5th Thursday. Marcus showed up as always, but when the Bentley pulled up, Emma wasn't smiling. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Richard looked frustrated. She doesn't want to do it today, he said sharply as he lifted her into the chair. Emma refused to look at either of them. Marcus approached slowly. What happened? Emma crossed her arms. I tried to move my legs this morning and nothing happened. Nothing at all. I'm tired of trying. It's useless. Richard looked away, jaw clenched. She's been like this all week. Marcus nodded. He knelt beside her again. You think I never get frustrated? She didn't answer. You think I didn't cry in that hospital room when my grandmother couldn't breathe anymore and all I could do was hold her hand? Emma's eyes shifted toward him. You're allowed to be angry. I get angry sometimes too. But if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too. She stared at the ground. I don't want you to give up, he said softly, because I haven't given up on you. Silence. Then Emma whispered, "I'm scared." Richard turned. That was the first time she'd admitted that out loud. Marcus leaned closer. "I'm scared too. But scared doesn't mean stop. It just means you're close to something important." Emma wiped her face. "Okay. Let's try again." And they did. Marcus guided her through the exercises gently, with less talking this time, just presence and patience. Richard participated more actively too, helping her shift weight, encouraging every small movement. After 40 minutes, Emma moved her right foot, not just her toes, her entire foot. It slid forward, slow and shaky, but it moved. Richard knelt down beside her, blinking like he wasn't sure he'd seen it correctly. "Do it again," he said breathlessly. She did. Marcus smiled but stayed quiet, just sat back and watched. Later that evening, Richard stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. He'd stopped questioning who Marcus really was, the question didn't matter anymore. Inside, Emma was laughing, retelling the foot movement to her aunt on video call. For the first time in 8 months, their home didn't feel like a medical facility. It felt like home again. But something inside Richard had started to change too, not just his daughter's legs, but the weight in his own chest. The guilt, the fear, the wall he'd built between himself and hope. It was cracking. Monday afternoon, Richard sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, staring at an unsigned merger contract. His phone buzzed constantly, emails, calls, board meeting requests, but none of it felt urgent anymore. What kept replaying in his mind was that moment in the park, Emma's foot sliding forward like it belonged to her again. He'd witnessed it with his own eyes, and the person who made it possible was a homeless 10-year-old with taped shoes and no address he could find. He opened a new browser tab and searched Marcus Williams Chicago. Nothing relevant came up. He tried different combinations, homeless youth, physical therapy, grandmother, still nothing. He closed the laptop and leaned back. This kid was practically invisible, except he wasn't. By Saturday, they were back at Millennium Park, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Richard brought an extra blanket and a thermos of hot chocolate. He handed Marcus a sandwich when they arrived, didn't make a big deal about it, just placed it beside his duffel bag. Marcus gave a quiet, "Thank you," and saved it for later. "Ready, Emma?" he asked. She gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. "Let's do this." They settled into their routine, heat packs, stretches, toe exercises. Today Richard participated fully. He sat cross-legged on the grass, following every movement Marcus demonstrated, even messing up once. "You're rotating the wrong direction," Marcus said with a grin. Richard gave him a mock glare. "I haven't done yoga since business school." They all laughed, including Emma. About 25 minutes in, Marcus sat forward. "All right, Emma, let's try something new." He pulled a resistance band from his bag and positioned it under her knees, showing Richard how to hold each end. "She's going to try to lift both knees at the same time. We help stabilize her, but she controls the movement." Richard blinked. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded confidently. "She's ready." They gave her a moment. Her forehead creased with concentration, eyes closed. She took a deep breath, and then her knees lifted, barely an inch, but they lifted together. Richard stared at her in amazement. "You did that?" She grinned widely. "I did it." He swallowed hard. "You really did it." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes on the resistance band. "See? The body remembers. You just have to trust it enough to listen." Richard looked at him. "You're incredible, kid." Marcus didn't respond, just continued guiding Emma through the next exercise. After the session, as they packed up, Richard crouched beside Marcus. "Where do you go after this?" Marcus shrugged. "Around." Richard lowered his voice. "Do you have a safe place to sleep?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "Sometimes." Richard exhaled slowly, rubbing his neck. "Would you consider coming to stay with us for a while?" Marcus's eyes widened. "You're serious? I have a guest room. You wouldn't be any trouble." Marcus looked down at his hands. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind someone like me?" Richard gave a short laugh. "Kid, after what you've done for my daughter, they'd better not say a word." Marcus didn't answer immediately, but Richard could see him thinking it over. The next morning, Marcus stood outside Richard's penthouse building, backpack over one shoulder, a rolled-up sleeping bag under his arm. Richard opened the door wearing sweatpants and holding a coffee mug. "Right on time," he said. Emma rolled up in her wheelchair. "Marcus." He smiled. "Hey superstar." Richard stepped aside. "Welcome home." The days that followed were peaceful but meaningful. Marcus got his own room, a comfortable bed, clean clothes, and a small desk by the window. He didn't talk much, but he never missed a morning stretch session with Emma. She was moving both feet consistently now, not walking yet, but the connections were strengthening. Her brain was reaching out to her legs like it remembered their relationship. One evening, as Richard washed dishes, he paused and turned around. "Marcus," he said, "have you ever thought about going back to school?" Marcus, who was sketching at the kitchen table, glanced up. "Sometimes." Richard nodded. "You're brilliant. You could accomplish anything." Marcus tilted his head. "I want to help people walk again, like my grandmother did." Richard turned to face him completely. "Then let's figure out how to make that happen." Marcus gave a small smile. "Okay." They didn't talk much more that night, they didn't need to. But for the first time in years, the Blackstone household wasn't filled with silence. It was filled with the small sounds that meant life: footsteps, conversations, pencils on paper, and healing. It started with a doctor from Northwestern Memorial. She was taking her lunch break in Millennium Park one Thursday afternoon and spotted a familiar face, Emma. She hadn't seen her outside her wheelchair in almost a year, let alone smiling, lifting her knees, wiggling her toes, and sitting beside her was the same quiet boy who used to sit by the hospital entrance every day. She didn't interrupt, just observed from a distance, then went back and mentioned it to a colleague. A few days later, a physical therapist at the hospital asked Richard, "Hey, I heard Emma's making real progress. Is that true?" Richard nodded. "Yes, thanks to someone we weren't expecting." Word spread quickly. The next time they showed up at Millennium Park, 3 other families were waiting near their usual spot. One had a boy who used crutches, another had a girl recovering from a spinal injury. Both sets of parents had heard about the kid who helped the Blackstone girl move her legs again. Marcus looked at Richard. Richard looked back at him. "You don't have to," he said quietly. Marcus adjusted the strap on his bag. "I want to." He gave up his usual one-on-one time with Emma that day to work with the 2 new kids. He showed their parents the same towel techniques, how to prepare the rice packs correctly, how to encourage without pressuring. And he spoke to the kids directly, not around them. "You're not damaged," he told one of them. "You're just learning a different way to be strong." Emma watched everything from her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap. She didn't complain once. Later, on the drive home, she said, "I like watching him help people." Richard glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Yeah? It makes me feel like I'm part of something important." He smiled. By the next week, 6 families showed up. The week after that, it was 12. A local church brought folding chairs, a nearby cafe started donating pastries and coffee. Someone printed simple flyers that read, "Free movement therapy, Thursdays at 2 p.m., Millennium Park." They didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone knew who it was about. A local news reporter showed up with a camera and notebook. Richard pulled Marcus aside. "Are you comfortable with this?" Marcus looked around at the families, at the kids moving their limbs, at Emma laughing with a boy on crutches. He nodded. "As long as it's not about me. It's about them." The reporter wrote her story. It ran on the front page of the Chicago Tribune under the headline, "10-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in City Park." They didn't share his full name, Marcus had asked them not to, but people found out anyway. A local physician offered to mentor him. A rehabilitation center offered to fund proper equipment. Someone else offered free tutoring. For the first time since his grandmother passed, people didn't just look past Marcus, they saw him. But Marcus never boasted. He still laid out the towel the same way every Thursday, still wore the same jacket, still checked on Emma first before helping anyone else. But now the park that once echoed with tourist chatter had become a place filled with purposeful movement. And a boy who once had nowhere to go had become the center of something bigger than himself. It had been 12 Thursdays, 12 weeks of towels on grass, of Emma's knees lifting higher, of small victories shared with families who'd become like extended relatives. But this Thursday felt different. Marcus could sense it before they even arrived at the park. The air felt warmer, the trees seemed to sway more gently, and even Emma was unusually quiet in the back seat, focused, like she was preparing for something significant. When they arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. Nothing overwhelming, just families setting up their chairs, therapists kneeling beside kids, parents with hopeful expressions. And right in the center of it all was that same weathered towel under the big tree. Marcus didn't say anything at first, just unpacked his bag, spread out the towel, and gave Emma a meaningful look. "You ready?" She nodded seriously. No smile, just pure determination. Richard wheeled her to the center of the towel. Marcus knelt in front of her. "Same as always," he said softly. "We help you stand, you do the rest." Richard positioned himself behind her, placing his hands under her arms. Marcus took her legs, guiding them gently into position. "Okay," Marcus whispered. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Richard lifted. Marcus steadied her knees. And then she stood. Her legs trembled, her arms shook, but she was upright on her own 2 feet. The entire crowd fell silent. Some kids gasped. One mother covered her mouth with her hand. Emma opened her eyes slowly and smiled. I'm standing. Marcus blinked back tears. Yeah, you are. Richard froze for a moment, like he couldn't breathe. Then he let go. She stayed up. He stepped back, hands shaking. She's doing it. Marcus stepped back too, just slightly. She's been doing it all along. Emma took one tentative step, then another. And then, because she was 7 and fearless and didn't know how to doubt herself, she took a third step completely on her own before falling into her father's arms. He caught her, laughing and crying at the same time, his hands trembling as he held her. You did it, he whispered. You really did it. Emma turned to Marcus. You said I would. He gave her a gentle grin. I said we'd try. That afternoon, nobody rushed to leave the park. People stayed, talked, hugged, some prayed. Marcus sat back on his usual spot on the towel and watched it all. He didn't say much, he never did. Later that night, Richard stood in the kitchen while Marcus poured cereal into a bowl. You know you changed everything, he said quietly. Marcus didn't look up. Did I? Richard walked over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. My daughter walked today. Not because of a hospital or a surgeon or an experimental treatment. She walked because a kid with nothing decided to show up, again and again, even when nobody asked him to. Marcus nodded. That's what my grandmother would have done. Richard's voice caught. I wish she could have seen this. Marcus said softly, she did. I think she sees everything. Richard wiped his eyes. Marcus, he said quietly, you're going to change countless lives. Marcus looked up at him. I already am. There are people in this world who might not have impressive credentials, polished resumes, or perfect backgrounds. But they carry something far more powerful, compassion, resilience, and a determination to keep showing up. Sometimes the most wounded people are the ones holding the tools to help others heal. If this story touched you, don't just keep it to yourself, share it. And if you know a kid like Marcus or a girl like Emma, tell them this, you matter, you're needed, and your story isn't over yet.